bringing together the different perspectives of different national agencies on these topics. And I would like to ask now Ms. Ruland, Ms. Jaborowska, and Ms. Joyce to open your cam. Let's meet all here in public, so to speak. And I am extremely honored to be your host and move into the question of IHES in a COVID-19 world, perspectives of the national agencies. It sounds grand, you know? And that's why we all together decided that we make it a little bit less grand and a little bit more down to earth by not doing more PowerPoint presentations, except for showing what we want to talk about, and rather have it as a kind of discussion between the three of us, and me just being the lucky chair of this session. So welcome to all of you. We are very honored to have you there. 3 major figures from 3 major agencies. Who could wish for more? And we talk about COVID-19 and how it has impacted your life. And what I would like to start with is to ask, now, what was the major challenge for your national agency during this year as it's going on still? And can you highlight this with a practical example, some anecdotal evidence? And may I start in Poland? So to speak, Warsaw, can we have your votes, please?
Thank you very much for
yes.
Very great, very warm welcoming, and for the invitation to this panel. Yes, exactly. This year it's a very special year for all agencies deal with international cooperation. So the major challenge was and still is to ensure the continuity of the NAVA programs. We have tried to be as flexible and understanding as possible for our beneficiaries to maintain the continuity of the projects financed by NAVA. In many cases, we managed to extend projects to upcoming years. In other cases, we were able to carry out programs fully online, as in the case of the Polish language and culture courses. NAVA also managed the Ready, Steady, Go Poland campaign, so we felt responsible for international students who stayed in Poland during the pandemic, and we have undertaken activities to support them, including the current situation in Poland and COVID-19 status in Poland, as well as organizing webinars with psychologists or scientists to ensure they were also able to receive mental health support. At the time, we wanted to support Polish universities by providing them with online tools. Also in the field of international promotion, we created a platform to organize online fairs and conferences so they could promote their offers or meet potential partners. To meet the expectation of our beneficiaries and respond to the needs of today's world, we decided to design a new program, among others, the Urgency Grants, a Polish grant for rapidly changing world. This program enables scientists to finance the logistics surrounding scientific work and travel to research sites swiftly. The choice of scientists who obtains funding depends chiefly on the nature of phenomenon to be studied. For example, it depends on the changing world. What matters is scientific significance of the problem and the need to get on site and study the problem fast. Research related to COVID-19 is one example of the project that could be financed with this program. So as today's conference is entitled the Internationalization in Higher Education for Society, it is important to mention another initiative we have undertaken. As neighbors of Belarus, with more than 7,300 Belarusian students enrolled in Poland during the 2019-2020 academic year. And in observing the struggle for democratic governments, we decided along with
You are breaking down.
Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Education and Science. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, you were breaking down a little bit, but we can also come back to that.
So I just wanted to mention the special scholarship program addressed to Belarusian students, scientists, and teachers.
Excellent.
So thank you.
No, that is a very good approach. How is it in Germany, Dr. Rieland? What was the major challenge, and do you have a kind of a practical example? We cannot hear you. You have to switch on your microphone, please.
Sorry. We had challenges on any kind of levels you can think about. In a certain way, we had to reinvent ourselves. We had to switch to home office, as you all had to do as well. We had to bring scholarship holders back from all over the world. I just remember one student, she was stranded in a Chinese monastery, and she stayed over there for the whole period of COVID-19 in China. We had to send students or PhDs who stayed in Germany and who wanted to go back home, back to their home country. So we had to move something like 8,000 people at that time. Our most important goal was to help this young generation to realize the planned academic endeavor. For that, we tried to switch to a digital mode in all of our programs wherever this was possible, from one day sometimes to the next one. What is not so easy, because you have to introduce new rules, new regulations, you have to talk, with the ministries where they agree, but they were extremely flexible, I must say. And what we did as well, similar to our Polish colleague, we started to introduce new schemes to help and support our universities to keep on with cooperation with their partners abroad. We introduced two different programs. One is called International Program Digital, where we offered full programs, digitalized, bachelor, but mostly on the master's level. And we started a second program, International Virtual Academic Collaboration, to go on in cooperation with partners, mostly on semester programs. So many new activities and changes all over.
That's in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
COVID and the DAD. How is it in Britain? I mean, you do not only have COVID, you also have to deal with the Brexit. But today, no second mentioning of the Brexit. So
I'd appreciate that.
No, we don't. So how was it in your situation?
Very similar, very similar to the challenges that we've just heard, and Dorothea's summary, very similar to ours, just having to innovate, find new ways of doing things. A really important part of the British Council's mission and work is to support the international mobility of students and researchers. So I guess one of our biggest challenges, like many of you, was what do you do when suddenly travel is no longer possible? And actually, I think this has been on many of our minds for some time as we face the climate crisis. But I think COVID, really has brought that challenge into sharp focus this year of how to enable those international collaborations and exchanges in a situation where travel either isn't desirable or isn't possible. I think it's really forced us to think differently and to think about those virtual opportunities, at least to get us through, this year. But equally, we've been thinking about how can we support those changing needs of students and institutions in the future. You asked for a practical example. I think the most immediate practical challenges that we've faced have similar to Dorothy's example, but involving supporting the many young people around the world who were stuck. It was so tough seeing the personal impact on people. We had a number of UK students out in China who were traveling during Chinese New Year when the kind of pandemic started, and they were never able to get back into the country or their city they were living in to collect their belongings or say goodbye to friends. Then we had others who decided to stay overseas despite all the uncertainties. We had many scholars in the UK who were clear they wanted to, stay and weather the storm. But of course, that involved being far away from home, having to navigate new restrictions, postponed exams, virtual teaching. And I think this is where technology helped enormously. My team involved, that they set up weekly group calls for scholars so that they had that strong sense of peer support, and giving them that kind of feeling of home, even though they were in a very vulnerable situation. So yeah, it's been an immensely challenging time, but I've felt quite heartened by the resilience I've seen of the young people impacted, and as well as my colleagues around the world that have had to pull out every stop to deal with the many unprecedented challenges we've had to face.
I can see that, and resilience is of course also a question for the next year, no?
Yeah.
How long can we possibly live with this? That is a question we cannot answer because we're not the scientists, but what we could answer is, now how do you prepare for the upcoming year? Especially of course now, where they make it even more difficult for us, in a good way. We have no idea which vaccination will work, when it will work, for whom it will work. So how do you prepare for that? What is lying ahead now in the 6 to 12 months ahead? How do you cope with the unknown? Dr. Rieland, you first, maybe.
I think I totally agree. I think the next year is quite unpredictable. What is very important, Kate mentioned, I think this is a very, very important aspect. You need lots of communication with the people you do support, either abroad or here in Germany. I read one sentence, which I like very much in a survey. The new normal is uncertainty. And I think this is really true for the next year. The only thing what we can do, we have to be extremely flexible. I'm quite sure this term and the summer term as well, the universities still will work in a digital mode, actually. On the other hand, we do know from many studies from all over the world, we have very close contacts with all our European partners. In general, we meet every 4 weeks. Of course, digital as well. We do know the students still want to go abroad. Only for 10%, a digital degree is an alternative. So students are very positive. They are not frightened of COVID-19 and they still want to go abroad. And I think we should do everything we can to make it work. We had quite high numbers of applications. The numbers are at a level of 80% in comparison to the last year. But on the other hand, not all of them can make it to Germany. I think that might be the same quite all over the world because there are visa problems, there are no flights, there are quarantines. But it gives you an idea how urgently, the younger generation is longing for this kind of intercultural endeavor, going abroad, build up their own networks, make their friends. And this is how we have to cope,
She puts it, without an alternative, right? It's true.
Yeah.
Dr. Joyce, how is the situation for the British Council?
Yeah, I agree. I agree entirely that I think we're going to continue to face a period of uncertainty and volatility. I guess we're trying to continue planning, but with much greater flexibility and, in some cases on shorter timeframes to try to keep on top of the many changes. We do quite a lot of work in the British Council to gather insight from around our global network and do analysis to try and keep on top of changes in markets, in policy environments. We've also been trying to use this opportunity to kind of innovate in our approaches. So if physical travel isn't looking possible for the next 6 months, how can we continue to collaborate internationally with our partners, with our stakeholders? And with the case of conferences, I mean, look at what has been possible the last 2 days, so many people from so many countries coming together in a virtual space to share and learn. And I think we can't stop having these cross-border conversations. Now more than ever, we need to be sharing knowledge and ideas and solutions internationally. So yeah, I think with the case of student exchanges, I agree with Dorothy. I think people still want to travel, and they still want to study overseas. I think in some cases that's not possible at the moment. So we've been piloting approaches to virtual mobility to see how they can at least gain some of that intercultural exposure. And, you know, there have been some successes here, but personally, I don't think virtual will ever fully replace face-to-face. Although, of course, it can actually be a really effective way of sustaining connections and links. So, yeah, I think we're learning a lot through this process.
Isn't it? I always think I learned the most in times of crisis. Dr. Żebrowska, how is it in Poland? How did you cope with the unknown?
Yes, I have to echo to Dorothy and Kate's statements. Yes, we have to try to be as flexible and understanding as possible in this time. And we have to maintain the continuity of our projects financed by NAVA. We are working hard to design programs that meet the expectation of our beneficiaries and respond to the needs of today's world. We plan to continue this effort supporting Polish higher education institutions in Poland through our programs, as well providing them with online tools. For instance, a platform for organizing virtual fairs, webinars, and training. Next year, we are planning to launch new programs along the next editions of current programs. And we believe that we will manage to continue our mission.
And that brings us from the immediate future to the far ahead future. The expectations, you know, for the longer future, far ahead. Will it be, you know, you probably followed the discussion on University World News about, all back to normal. Yeah, the human is a creature of habit. As soon as we can, we move back to everything we had before, or no, nothing will be the same, or is it something in between? Dr. Joyce, what's your opinion? In Britain, I mean, no, we will not mention it, but you will move into various different futures probably. But what's your opinion? All the same as before? Nothing the same? Something in between? What is your prediction?
I think that the future of international higher education will be different. I don't think it will be the same. I think there are some long-term changes, but actually some of those changes started before COVID and have been accelerated by the pandemic. So I think in relation to international student mobility, I think, as we said earlier, students do still want to study abroad. I think there will always be demand, and we ran some market sentiment surveys in April and August in some of our key markets around the world, and they told us that students still want to study overseas. But I think COVID, you know, the situation we're in, it will continue to impact student decisions. So, for example, in relation to where they will study, and I think there's been a trend towards regionalization, so more mobility within a region, and that was already underway before COVID-19 struck. And I think we'll see more students potentially choosing to study closer to home. They'll take into account national policies and factors such as healthcare and security, and you know how quickly countries can bounce back from the pandemic. I think secondly, and linked to that, I think the cost of study abroad will be even more of a factor for many students and their families because of the economic impact of COVID. And I think we'll see a rise in newer forms or more blended forms of international learning. So, for example, with more students wanting shorter periods of international study abroad, perhaps with the majority of their study happening in their home institution. And I think that's becoming increasingly possible through deeper university partnership and transnational education arrangements. And I think these kinds of partnerships are making international education more financially affordable and accessible to more people, potentially, as well as being a pathway to mobility. And as we learnt in the session yesterday, in the TNE session, these kinds of TNE arrangements can also boost local employability and kind of bring internationalization benefits to local institutions and communities. And finally, I think that the pandemic crisis has started to and will continue to accelerate the kind of development of online education. I think we'll see more blended learning, in-person teaching, physical, location-based teaching combined with virtual learning. There could be quite a reinvention of the learning environments.
Thank you.
See changes.
Dr. Żebrowska, Poland, after COVID, all back to what it was before or nothing the same? What do you think?
So, in analyzing the past year and the current situation, it is difficult to imagine returning to a normal pre-COVID-19 reality. Some things probably won't come back. Some solutions implemented during the past year work well and will be effective. For example, the fact that we don't need to travel so often because some online tools like this conference are a good replacement that is effective. In terms of programs, what could work is a hybrid form. We have implemented simplifications or shorter application processes that work and met with approval of potential beneficiaries. What will be a big challenge is the movement of international students and scientists, and the challenges will have consequences in lower numbers of international students in Poland, unless all Polish universities are able to provide good quality studies online that will attract students worldwide. But even in this case, in some countries, it will still be difficult to gain access to online education. It is a challenge, and sadly finding a solution, it won't be easy. Another long-term problem will be substituting virtual or physical mobility, and even that works in some cases, it is impossible to completely replace face-to-face contact or networking.
And it's probably also not something we should look forward to have no physical interactions anymore.
Yes.
That brings us to Germany. Of course, of course in Germany, everything will go back to normal, right?
No. Nothing at all. I'm very much convinced universities and internationalization will look quite differently after COVID-19. I think there are many lessons learned, and you already mentioned quite a number of them. COVID-19, I think, has speed up many processes. Some of them already started much earlier, as for example mentioned regional mobility. But one lesson I think which is very important, what we learned from COVID-19, science was never as important as today, because only science can solve the pandemic problem we do have. We need vaccine, we need treatment, and for this we need science. And the second lesson we learned, obviously cooperations have been quite resilient during the crisis. There are quite a number of indicators, for example, publications. If you look at international publications during the first few months of COVID-19, you can see there were many more publications than in a similar period before. So obviously cooperations are resilient for good reasons, because the people know them, they know each other, they do trust each other, they have their ways and means of cooperation. So from my point of view, scientific collaboration will be the way of the future. What might be different from the time before COVID-19, I think there will be a tendency to have more multilateral cooperations. All the different agencies up to now mostly work on a bilateral level, except from British Council, for example. There is one huge program, Newton program, where you sometimes have three lateral cooperations, if I'm right. But I think the future will be actually multilateral cooperations. And for this, we do have to change our own strategy and our own regulations. And digitalization, of course, has accelerated many new developments. And I think we have to find a new balance between physical and virtual mobility. And again, we have to think, what are the aims and goals of this kind of mobility? And as I mentioned in the opening, I think it's very important for the younger generation to have a chance to go abroad and physically, to gain intercultural experience, to learn how to live in a foreign environment, to build up their own networks. For them, I think we really should fight for that. But on higher levels, quite often we can work with virtual digitalization, you know, like conferences as we have today, you know. In former times, I would have loved to travel to Prague, of course, but it's great to make it possible, you know, and many more people actually can join, you know. So digitalization helps to open up diversity and quality as well, because you can bring together the best people from all over the world who wouldn't be possible to travel all the time. As Kate mentioned, I think we will have much more regional mobility for several reasons, and this already started before COVID-19. TNE might be a second wave of TNE now, because might be parents are much more interested to keep the kids in the country, but nevertheless offer a kind of international exposure. And TNE is a marvelous instrument for that. So I think there are other issues for, after COVID-19. I think we had huge discussions going on about climate change, about sustainability, and these issues are not gone, and they will come back on the agenda. And with this in mind, I think we have to readjust again mobility in the field of internationalization as well. So many challenges, many new issues, and it will look, I'm quite sure, quite differently.
Thank you. And as we always know, as soon as we define a problem as an opportunity or challenge, we are much more likely to find a good solution. The second thing that I always think is there is this rule that a crisis makes you prepare for the next crisis of that type, but that one never shows up. There's always a new one. 9/11 was thankfully never repeated. And we don't want to see anything like this again. And hopefully COVID-19 will also stay a one-time challenge, but there will be other crises and we learn from that. What I would like to do is that since you are really special guests we have, I break my rule of finishing within exactly the timeline, because we have one really interesting question where I would like to have a very, very brief answer from each of you. And it comes from Carlos Machado. And the question is this: with the new European Universities Initiative, the move towards more joint programs across universities in Europe, and the policy goal from the European Commission to have a more integrated European dimension of higher education, what do the members of the panel think that the role of their agency might be in this decade? So I don't have an order planned for this, so whoever feels to answer first, but please be brief. Thank you.
Okay, I make a start, because I'm very much convinced that these European universities are a role model for the future. And wherever I traveled before COVID-19, for example, to China, Chinese presidents were so much impressed by this initiative. I think, as I mentioned, we have to change our way of thinking from bilateral cooperation much more to networks. I think one keyword for the future will be to have the right networks. We have to bring together the right people working on certain issues, the scientists, to find solutions together. And of course, we need facilitators. My understanding in the field of European universities, which are supported by funding from the German ministry as well. Our networks not only get the funding from Brussels, but from the German side as well. France is doing the same. We try to help them to facilitate, to identify the problems, and there are many problems. I wouldn't have expected that there are so many bureaucratic hurdles between different European countries to make these networks work. And we try to help the universities to find solutions together with the ministries in the respective countries. So this is my understanding, a kind of facilitator.
Thank you. Who wants to go second?
After you.
Thank you, Kate. Sorry, I just want to say, yes, it's true. We are going from this bilateral cooperation to multilateral cooperations, and on the side of NAVA, I can say that we'll stay together with our partners from other European countries and facilitate this process. Thank you.
And Britain, may we have your vote?
Well, I very much hope we'll have some sort of involvement in the future, but I think that, yeah, these kind of multilateral structures and networks are enormously important, I think, going forward, because that they can play such a big role in enabling those collaborations, the mobility as well, to happen more easily. I'm just thinking, Dorothea, about the EU Share program as well that we have in East Asia, you know, working with ASEAN. Again, it's about a network. It's about enabling kind of intra-regional, but also between regional collaboration and mobility. So I think it's enormously positive.
And let's say, I mean, there are also UK universities involved, and I don't give up hope, you know. Particularly not with my one of my alma maters being in the UK, in Bristol, University of Bristol. I don't give up hope that there will be a change. You will come back. There's no chance that the UK stays out of Europe for very much longer.
Can I make a correction?
Yes.
We're leaving the EU. We are not leaving Europe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is true. Tell that to the media,
Yeah.
but it's absolutely true. You will come back to the European Union, and we are waiting for that. I would like to thank you so much for your engaged involvement in this panel. It was short, but I also learned over the days that the format of 30 minutes seems to be really, really appropriate for online sessions. I would like to ask you to stay with me with a camera for my final goodbye, because it looks much better than if it's me. So I would just like to close the conference here. And I also do that. I want to have you here on the screen for a very special purpose, because let's face it, there has to be a big thank you from my side to Various. And first of all, that's you, because you represent the institutions who made this event possible. Without your support, we could not have done it, and we could for sure not have done it in a way that Dr. Rueland expressed, to have people participate from all over the world at no cost. Because there was a cost, but you took the load, and we are deeply grateful for that. I also want to express my gratitude to 51 speakers from across the world who provided 22 sessions, panels, and a keynote in these 2 days. And without them, it would have been very boring, because you would have had to listen to me all the time, and I would probably have fallen asleep to listen to my own voice all the time. It was a fantastic mixture. I think we've seen a lot of perspectives on IHES, a lot more than we knew before, and in a kind of a challenging way ahead. Then I want to also say thank you to you. You are the attendees. We had 700 plus registered participants in this event, and you spread all over the sessions, of course, as it is on a conference. You know, I was sometimes thinking, in many ways, we try to copy the structure of a conference with a speaker's room, with the auditorium, with a launch, and also with, of course, the IHES Idea Padlet, which is open and stays open, so leave your ideas there. But without these 700, it would have been also boring talking to ourselves, right? But it's 700, and how much I ever like Prague, let's face it, we would not have had 700 participants coming to Prague, even without COVID, on this conference, not forgetting that there are some quite competitive events at the same time right now. I also want to use the opportunity to thank the IHES conference team, those behind the scenes who made all these things possible, and without them it would not have happened. And I think it is sometimes easy to forget I really also want to thank the Zoom expert team, Ruth, Agnes, and Tilipan, because those were the ones, for you as attendees, you didn't see that, but there was an extra room in which all the presenters were invited first and the tech was checked and everything. And you have no idea how many frantic emails from my side, well, those who work with me can imagine, this Zoom team had to deal with in the months before. But that is also something that we have to see. We cannot take technology just for granted. And it is all about the individuals. It is all about us in the end. And IHES is about us, and it's about us in the universities working with the public. And so I want to close this conference with a very, very heartily felt, stay safe and healthy, make it healthily through the months until you have this vaccine in the hand, which you get into your arm or wherever they put it. I have no idea. But I will also hope that we all get there without any complications. And I would truly hope that we can all meet again in 2021. And if you could join me with a waving to our participants and saying goodbye, thank you very much, have a nice weekend, and we will close this conference then in a few seconds. Thank you so much. I'm deeply honored to be allowed to have this chaired this conference. Goodbye.